Hey Rebecca, so I'm recording this as a video because if I just wrote the text for it, it probably would come off as hostile because I speak very strongly, and I do so with pointed facts. People absent those pointed facts can take it as if it's a personal attack. That's not the case. It is a clarifying of the historical record in accordance with the appropriate documented evidence to that effect, of which I have had the time to review thoroughly in excess, in abundance, ad nauseum, to a point where I just want to throw up in my hands and drown myself because it is so glaringly obvious at this point that it is appalling that other people have not taken it upon themselves to do so. So in the general sense, I get where you're coming from, that we're supposed to agree to disagree and be compassionate and heartfelt and all of the very important human characteristics that we are supposed to show at all times unto one another. But in the middle of an ongoing genocide, me being more than a little bit irked should be understandable. And the thing about the pandemic, which was not a respiratory person-to-person virus, that's been proven by 3 different people, each of whom have their own research teams and came to the same conclusions. One of them being Denis Rancourt. I've interviewed him personally, had him on the show, and he found that 17 million people died as a result of the experimental gene therapy. This is not a vaccine. It was an experimental gene therapy that was labeled a vaccine to trick people into taking it. And that about 80 million people have really profound, life-threatening illnesses that have yet to end their life as a result of it, and 400 million people have a compounding, incremental adverse effect. Other people who have come to the exact same conclusion are Edward Dowd. He looked into the dying suddenly phenomena, wherein we saw 1,000-fold increases of athletes dying spontaneously after getting the shot, and that isn't immediately. There's also a window of time, and everyone's different, so it's different for everyone. And then the third person is Mark Skidmore, and these are different individuals who have research teams behind them coming to the same fundamental conclusion. Your contention that it wasn't a genocide is completely inaccurate. It was a genocide. It was just done differently than conventional genocides. It was a genocide against people who did not comply. Now, it was also a genocide against people who did comply. And it's really important to understand that the experimental gene therapy isn't the same for everyone. Using electron microscopy in order to analyze what is in the vials, we have seen that it looks like a dump truck just put a bunch of shit in these, and every single one of them is different. Every single one. You can look at websites like, I think it's badbatch.org or something, that tracks mortality rate directly alongside of what people injected into themselves, but it isn't that simple because this actually compounds and is exacerbated by other variables. The number one trigger for illness is actually stress. So I'd contend that a lot of the people who think that they died from the shot actually died from the stress of getting the shot, who died from the psychosomatic emergence and the hyperbolic way in which we can all approach something when it is very much a life and death situation. And then you have to look at the weaponization of the hospital protocols, the administering of remdesivir, the outlawing of alternative therapeutics. You have to look at the false claim of hospitals being overwhelmed when they were not. This being not my personal testimony, countless whistleblowers working in those hospitals have come forth to testify to this effect. So what we're looking at is actually a international collaborative genocide between nation states as presided over by the WHO and the CDC. Why? Because those are offshoots of the United Nations, which was created deliberately to subvert human populations under the notion of diplomacy, which is not accurate. This is a cartel pretending to be diplomatic on behalf of humanity when really they're just kind of bitch-wit, neutered, and grotesquely deficient, to put it kindly. Their predecessor was the League of Nations, and that was set up post-World War, basically at the behest of, United Nations was set up post-World War. League of Nations was First World War, Second World War, clarifying different things. But even those were all the same fundamental objective. It is about redrawing and reorganizing nation states at the behest of what's called Anglo-American establishment. Carroll Quigley, military and historian, the mentor of Bill Clinton, talked about having access to the Council on Foreign Relations internal documents and the various different means and mechanisms that they use to subvert entire nation states and civilian populations. This was a genocide, only it's on a larger scale than all previous genocides. And it's one that was a human experimentation campaign, which is a violation of the Nuremberg Treaty and is a war crime on its face. So everyone who participated in this, I mean, coercion is a violation of medical ethics, so anyone who continued to exist as a medical professional professional in an environment of coercion is not a qualified medical professional. Period. Exclamation point. If you disagree with that, you are categorically wrong in every single way, and you need to return to a point of understanding the significance of ethics when it applies to whether or not you consider, and not you specifically, but medical authorities consider themselves qualified. People kind of just gave that a free pass. Okay, well, let's return to the point that I made previously of what was inside of the vials. Every single one of them different. Why is that? Because it's actually a vast human experimentation campaign. A lot of it was also placebo, too. Not everyone's going to interact with the shot the same way. So what that is human experimentation campaign. It's a violation of informed consent, which is another breach of medical ethics. So people who are in an environment of coercion, turning a blind eye to the violation of informed consent, while human experimentation is going on, and it's not actually a vaccine, it's an experimental gene therapy on record, yeah, no, sorry. The public conception of what happened is diametrically opposed to the reality. What happened was in a vast, elaborate human experimentation campaign at the behest of oligarchs that create organizations that on their face look like they're helping people, but even from the WHO's director, she had previously gone on record saying that she's basically just listening to whoever funds the organization at any given time, and that typically pivots back and forth between the United States and China, both of which are just industrial vectors to hide their occulted controllers. So much of what the conceptual framework by which people go about approaching the subject is illusory. It's made up. It's propaganda. It's state propaganda. It's much akin to like if I were to try and talk to a Zionist about October 7th, they'd be like, we were attacked, and no, you weren't. Most of the people who died were murdered by the Israeli government because it was a deliberately set up false flag in order to then pave the way for a planned genocide in Palestine, which was a byproduct of a much earlier agreement called the Balfour Declaration, which was the previous colonial holding of that nation to then, as a contingency of entering into a world war, promise the issuance of that land to whomsoever they wanted to give it to. The Jews were previously occupied Uganda and a number of other different countries, but they wanted that place specifically. In other words, there are multi-generational agendas that have been sequentially built before us such that we more or less exist in a scripted reality. The problem is that it's a very sophisticated script, and it's not something that the average person knows well enough to be able to actually speak from the heart. They kind of just tune into the superficial veneer of the actors that are in office. And they're all actors. Biden and Trump are identical. Barry Soetoro, you know him as Barack Obama, was groomed from an early age in order to take office. You can look at like Jimmy Carter being a peanut farmer who was solicited by the Trilateral Commission. All of these different people. I mean, even Reagan was a literal actor. It's like Clinton was a coke dealer and a prolific rapist in Arkansas. If you get into like what these people actually are, they are straight fucking demonic. But what they are, and I could do a good Obama impersonation for you, it's like, I believe in hope and change. We're supposed to go out there and believe in our fellow man. And by having an emotional effect on one another, people won't inspect the details, and they'll attack anyone who expects them to inspect those details. You're living under a spell, all of you are. You have been cast, or as in to say, these people have been cast in roles, who then go out there and kayfabe play against one another to give you the illusion that there's a separation when there isn't. It is a uniparty. It is not just a uniparty in the sense of the United States, which is a Zionist-occupied government and has been for a very long time, but even preceding that, it was really just the intelligence apparatus was an extension of MI6 and MI5. So this goes back to the Great Game. This is hundreds of years in the building. And the pandemic, which was not a respiratory virus, was a multitude of different things, okay? There was novel instances of poisoning campaign, basically. And that's partly through mask wearing and stress and not being out in sunlight and all these little qualifiers that affect people differently. It was also certain swabs were poisoned, certain areas were poisoned. That's where you get into virus-like particles. I know people who didn't get vaccinated, didn't get the shot, and still got that weird synthetic sickness where they lost their sense of taste and smell. Those are targeted instances of poisoning that is told to the public is a respiratory virus. But respiratory viruses do not stop on provincial or state lines. And via the research of the previous three members or people I had mentioned, that's exactly what this fucking thing did. Based on state lines, the respiratory virus would or would not stop at certain places and certain times, which is insane. The primary mortality spike happened post-injection schedule, and it's very important that it was the weaponization of hospital protocols that was most responsible of all. This is the kind of thing when elderly people are given a latex glove full of warm water so that they have the illusion that they're holding someone's hand as they're put into solitary confinement to die. That's a fucking genocide. Sorry, it is. If you don't understand that because of the conventional framework by which genocides have conventionally been perpetrated and are attempting to use that as the pretense by which you provide insight to what transpired, you are wrong. The persecution campaign that we endured under COVID was monumental and excruciating for everyone. It was significantly worse so for those of us who chose not to go along with it, but all the more spoke out against it. They literally built camps, rounded people up, and sent them there. They would break into people's homes if they had too many people in them. This was a state-sanctioned, enforced, sponsored, mandated, and let's just say demonically assimilated mindset that so many people were cowed by, they remain blind to this day. That's why I say you are all under a spell. It is something that would require hundreds, if not thousands of hours of the review of meticulous data sets in order to then differentiate and delineate between public proclamations of what happened versus what actually happened. That is all I have done for the last 5 fucking years. I do this on an extremely high level with the top journalists in the field, forensic historians who have had assassination attempts against them, who have been whistleblowers, be it from the Church of Satan or speaking out against Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was allegedly supposed to protect whistleblowers, but it doesn't. It hangs them out to dry. I am really sorry to tell you that all of the different people that you would turn to in an electoral capacity are not your friends. They are deceptive to the very end. They are installed. They are not elected. You have no say in anything. And the mythos by which people to continue to return to a Santa Claus mentality of our reality is ultimately the kind of things that will facilitate the murder of their friends and family. It is a slow motion genocide. It is multifaceted, convergent, and extends into the future of our life. How is that? That gets into the technocratic agenda. Technocracy being a movement that started in the early 1900s in order to redraw the world stage, much akin to how the Treaty of Versailles was just an unrealistic contract that gave a 20-year rearmament period to then have Wall Street fund the Second World War. And the IB Farben plants that Germany depended on were not bombed in that period. Why? Because it was a controlled demolition of Europe in order to crush Germany and have America emerge as the prominent superpower after that war. All right? Even from the perspective of just look at what's the name of the thing? Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, number 2, passed under Obama. That gives every news reporting agency in the United States legal precedent to lie to you. Everything on the news is a lie. And then combine that with the fiduciary responsibility that these various different news organizations have to report fraudulently. They are literally monetarily incentivized to lie to you. If you do not unplug from the state propaganda that you take at face value and give me agree to disagree about objective, verifiable, demonstrable truths that determine the life of your fucking kids, lady, what the fuck? So where I am at with geriatric, presumptuous, emotion-based people who off the cuff say that, well, our tone of voice about these things is more important than, well, people floating face down in the river. Sorry, honey, I gotta tell you. The fact that you would even approach it that way tells me that you do not understand the state of things or how bad they are or how bad they're gonna get. This is a genocide. It's a slow motion one being done in an alternative means that you are not privy to, have not reviewed the evidence for, and then are inclined to shirk away from because what has been enacted is equivalent of what I call gaslight gas chambers. That's when they create the very technological infrastructure around you that slowly clamps down to then asphyxiate you. That's what we're seeing happening. And the only way that's able to be done is keeping people in a perpetual state of moving on from one thing to the next thing, psyop after psyop, incident after incident. I mean, just look at ICE. That is straight up fascism. We know that. But that's not specific to Trump. You look at the National Defense Authorization Act, that was signed under Obama or under Bush, but it was written by Biden. This is a hand-to-hand momentum of people who are all in it together. You've been watching a reality TV show, thinking that it's reality, and you need to change the channel. You need to. Your kids are not going to be okay if you all keep acting this way. I have attempted to have this conversation in a nuanced, emotionally calibrated way with my father for 5 years straight. He's not there. He does not exist. The only thing he cares about is whether or not he appeases Linda. And that's because, given the trajectory of his life, his mom died early, his sister died young, my mom cheated on him and divorced him. He's terrified of losing the women in his life, and if he loses Linda, it's basically the equivalent of feeling like he is going to die. It is very much a felt sense of pressure to acquiesce to the cultural climate that is created largely by women, who view this through an emotional lens rather than taking the time to look at how war is waged in the contemporary. That's via fifth generational warfare and full spectrum dominance. The military term for this is called a kill box. It is the geographic regions that you stipulate by which you will go about systematically killing things by every single means necessary. That's why I had previously asked you to ask Larry if war gives a shit about your feelings. Gotta tell you, honey, it doesn't. Doesn't give a fuck. That's not how this works. But feelings are the most successful way in order to go about murdering people. Why? Because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. So they'll just go back to the environment that feels comfortable for a time as the gas slowly gets turned up. Very, very slowly, in a war of attrition, in a death by 1,000 cuts, where it seems like there's nothing you can do, but hey, guess what? There's a lot that you can do. You can inform yourself about the reality, not the picture that was painted to look like reality that you have all been worshiping in Plato's cave. So what am I supposed to say if you don't understand the various different threads of nuance that were touched on and elucidated on in the presentation of the 10 Stages of Genocide? Because she talks about the technocratic agenda. Do you know what that is? Because I mentioned it when I was talking here. If you don't know what that is, then you're missing key parts of what she was alluding to. It isn't just the persecution campaign in that window, it's how that was the starting off pistol for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. We're starting to see that with the data center rollouts now. The poisoning of water. We're starting to see it with SSRIs, like 20 or 30% of the population is on them. That's literally not capable of weighing in on the conversation because they're so emotionally dead. They depend on a prescriptive medication in order to be able to cope with being alive at all. This is a genocide. It is a multifaceted international genocide to depopulate. On the record, these people have talked about it for generations. They see us as cattle. If you want to look at it the Zionist perspective, that's basically what Goyim means. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm the one who's saying here, y'all just like ain't really listening because you want to keep sipping lattes thinking it's a much happier position, but it's not. You getting fucked. And if you don't wake up, it falls on your kids. So do forgive me if I'm more than a little bit pissed. Much love to all y'all. Sorry I wasn't able to hang out with you. But being around people who don't understand reality, who still think Santa Claus is real, no. World isn't that simple. It's a lot more brutal. And it goes along the lines of Margaret Sanger, who had founded Planned Parenthood not to provide health care for women, but because it was an effective way to murder more African American children. Why? Her mantra was, kill them with kindness. Any environment that you gravitate towards right now that is excessively kind to you is a kill mechanism hidden behind an emotional shield. That's how war works now. Hope you're doing well. Much love to you. Show this to Larry. I'm not really interested in your uninformed opinions. I expect you to inform yourselves, and I'm pretty fucking good at that. Much love. Bye.